which I'm still unsure of now. And so I would say that was the first tournament where I was like spending a lot of effort post tournament to try to figure out how we came to that wrong conclusion on that deck selection. And then um, to be honest, I struggled in the first three PTs for my deck selection. Like that was not my strongest suit. I felt like there was a little bit
Mm.
of wow, I got there with raw I guess play skill despite not really having the best decks for this tournaments. So that was an interesting case study.
So what do you think is your
Yeah,
particular strength maybe as a player?
yeah, I would say a combination of I think I have a pretty good ability to take an existing deck and notice what slots may be off or need to be changed, slash what is set in stone, and then acting on it. So that might be changing sideboard slots. I'm just looking at your sideboard right now and being like, okay, like what cards would I consider even taking off the table from like the humans deck you showed me, which I have no experience with, or something like a Phoenix list, which I have put a lot with, and also just in-game decisions when it comes to spending a lot of effort on not giving up edges in mulligans. That's a big thing I've spent a lot of time on that I think I've gained a lot of equity on. Most of my testing partners and people tell me like I'm a very aggressive mulliganer, and I think that's something that's benefited me pretty well. Just getting a lot of repetitions in and spending a lot of time practicing that has probably been the single biggest exercise or improvement that I work through with a lot of people I coach and just with my teammates even.
Mm-hmm. Right. How much time do you spend on playing Magic, or like in, let's say, before tournament and like just in general on like a daily basis?
Question. So there's a divide between how much time I spend doing my own rigorous testing versus helping others with their own testing processes. I would say I probably spend 2 to 3 hours helping others with their testing processes, like throughout the week, so maybe 15 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then for myself, I probably test when I have a big tournament upcoming. It's pretty drastic. Like it can be anywhere from like 2 to 5 hours, but if not, maybe somewhere closer to 1 to 2 hours a day. So maybe not that extreme.
So,
I'm not
right.
sure.
So I get the impression that most of your playing, or like most of your time spent with the game is spent on like active pursuit of learning. Is that correct? Like, do you approach the game
Yeah,
very competitively at all times?
100%. Yeah, I definitely have a harder time breaking down into like a less competitive side of it. But um, oh, another important distinction I wanted to make was I think I spend a lot more time than average having discussions about Magic and not playing
Mm-hmm.
games. Like a lot more time spending discussions about theory and just generally trying to upgrade my understanding. Whereas I know a lot of my peers and people who have worked with are much more willing to play league-esque Magic or just want to be playing a 1v1 at all times while having discussions. And that's not something that I really jive with. I try to kind of do the opposite when I want to get an idea across or communicate with another person.
True. Like, is this really easy when you're playing alone, or when you're testing with a group? You just kind of fall into just playing the games because that's like the least the path of the least resistance. You just kind of play more games, and you're like, oh yeah, I don't know what to think about this card here or this strategy there, and you just sit and play more games and click more buttons. This is like an easy trap to
Yeah,
fall into, I guess.
100%. And like identifying why you're playing a game, like what your purpose is from playing, is another thing that I've spent a lot of time focusing on because it's really easy to just play an arbitrary number of games until you're burnt out, you don't want to play anymore, or your deck doesn't perform well, or it performs really well. And it's hard to have a takeaway from that if your goal isn't, I'm going to play Phoenix and I'm going to start with 3 Thing in the Ice in my main deck and see how that performs, for example. And then slowly I was like, okay, I realized that this card is pretty strong versus mono green, but you don't want that many copies of it versus any other matchup, and it doesn't really affect the game one matchup spread as much because game one you just need to draw a creature on turn two. So that's just an example of like the process that I would go through if I were trying to figure out a specific card that might be a one, a two of, or a three of, but that I know I want to play.
So yeah, it does seem like I guess one of the maybe keys to success is just being active in like your pursuit of learning, of course. That does well. That seems simple, but it is pretty true. Does seem pretty true.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I explained it so well when I was referring to um, my process of um, testing, but the specifics I would say are play less games and talk about Magic more and figure out what goals you're trying to achieve in testing before you even begin the process of going down a rabbit hole. And that's why it's sometimes hard to work with people because there's a lot of people who have very different goals on, or sorry, different processes on how to achieve their goals.
Mm-hmm.
And so you do have to find some compromises, especially when you're working with a team of players who you respect, right? Hopefully.
True, true. I like me personally. I have not ever found working with a team of players to be incredible for me. I think
Yeah.
there's been some like processes, like there's been some problems at faults, and like it wasn't always perfect, but it's certainly like the logistical part of this, and like what you say, just like trying to focus on discussion maybe sometimes instead of just playing games. I've frequently also fall into like the trap of just clicking buttons and playing more games because I don't know stuff, and that is often just a waste of time. Ends up.
Yeah. I would say the earliest mistake that I see when I'm like delving into a format is just that. And that might be where I struggle the most as well. Because before we have some established decks, I would say I have a hard time brewing and getting started with like the baseline of what a deck looks like. And so that's probably the most helpful aspect I take away from working with teams where when they're really good at doing that and coming up with some baseline ideas, I can usually take the existing model and try to change it with an understanding. So I try to look for players that have that strength as well, and that's served me well in the past to focus on. But I am curious from your background, do you feel like working with um, a team has been a hard thing to do because of personal things or because you don't feel like the testing is as good? What's gone down in that process that's been difficult for you?
Well, oftentimes I felt like, as you said, there's like different people with different goals, different like oftentimes a different level of engagement that they're willing to put out. Uh, I was also like sometimes not always willing to put the greatest level of engagement when it came to the arena tournament. Most of my testing with teammates happened during COVID, which was also not in person, which with like people who I was not always uh, that I not always knew very well before, which also probably made things maybe a bit harder because probably when you have a second person, when you have a team of people who like know in person and like that way you can respect them more and you have some kind of a bond that's more that's stronger.
Yeah,
That probably should be helpful. I think I kind of lacked that through the arena era of Magic, the MPL era of Magic. I think that might have been at fault.
yeah. No, that was certainly difficult. Another question that I wrote I had was, did you ever find you wanted to be testing with like closer friends versus teammates that might be stronger players? Because I feel like that's been a big thing that I've thought about a lot, where if you're working with people who you're closer with and who understand you're thinking about Magic better, it's a lot easier to be efficient and also make progress on your decks. Obviously, the overlap is important, but that's just a theme that I've noticed as I've gotten closer with particular teammates that I feel like has improved communication.
Certainly helps, as you said, with communication. It helps, like when you have a bond, you can communicate more clearly, more efficiently, and like you know each other, so you know how you talk, how you communicate. So I do prefer to test with people I know. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, the arena tournaments are hard also when there's like a ton of unknown deck. Like I I don't know if you want to go into this, but I was just going to mention about like the world's testing, how interesting that dynamic was
Mhm.
because there was no really known information. One thing that happened was the known best deck was people thought red black midrange was going to be represented in Explorer, and I assume from an outside perspective, since there's no information about this format, it's really unclear if there's any expected metagame. But for the players, I think we tried to do the normal process of translating Pioneer into Explorer because there was no other Delta,
Mhm.
and so yeah, the problem was I think everyone had that expectation that this was the best thing you should be doing before the testing process really started, and a lot of teams lost sight of what the actual response to that would be. And so this is where I would usually say some of my strength would come out. I think it was Sigrist's team with Eli Cassis, Jim Davis, and Jakob Toth brought mono blue spirits with 4 red ley lines in the sideboard. And that's the sort of innovation where it really warped the metagame actually to a point where these red black X midrange decks no longer were particularly great against spirits after playing the games against their build 3 times throughout the tournament and watching them play. So that was just like an interesting case of like these decks were pretty exploitable because of uh, our assumptions about the metagame and also the lack of any information. And at the same time, it was like that's what I try to do for the tournaments where I'm like, let's find this particular sideboard card that really warps things, and that will be like the breakthrough way of winning a tournament most of the time.
Mm. Yeah, that is all interesting to hear about. You also so you said you don't play, like you said that most of your playing is like most of your magic time rather is tied into helping other people, your teammates, with discussing with them or thinking about the game yourself. So you don't often just like sit and click buttons on Magic Online or Arena.
Yeah, I very rarely do, and I think I'm not sure if that's surprising to other people, but also it's just for me, I I feel like my baseline ability to play has gotten pretty good, and I gain like a very marginal amount from playing games. So once I have a deck locked in, that's when I'm like, okay, I need to play a lot of games. Or if I'm like, okay, there's 2 choices, then yes, like I'll play games with both archetypes and try to figure out what is going right about both of them. Um, but yeah, also when I refer to helping other people, I would say it's a combination of yeah, helping teammates, also doing coaching sessions, and just having insights from players that maybe haven't played as much helps my thinking. I would say there's also been a lot of moments where people who don't have as much experience playing just have interesting thoughts and spark ideas for me. So that went on during Pro Tour testing at the same time, or I guess for Worlds. Yeah.
All right, I'll give you my perspective on like what's been lately happening with my game. Namely, for the last, let's say, half a year, as you know, I stream daily, so I just play many games daily. Frequently, it kind of devolves into clicking buttons. For the past half a year, I really didn't really have decks that I was focused on in any formats too much, so I was just shuffling around a bunch of different decks every day and playing everyone with just kind of the baseline, my baseline
Yeah.
understanding of the game. Two pretty middling results that included the challenges on the weekends. Also kind of been performing pretty poorly for a relatively long time. And lately there is Sofia, right? So I'm preparing for Sofia for the regional championship. And the way I have approached that, since I have noticed that it is a really big problem for my game if I don't practice enough with a deck, I'm just been laser focusing on playing Pioneer only and focusing on playing especially Phoenix the most, as that's the deck that I favor the most, and it seems kind of like baseline one of the better decks in the format, and it's a deck I vibe with well, as I often say on my stream, and that's also seems like a valid reason for me to play it. So I guess there is a difference here. I know that Paulo Vitor also frequently talked about the fact that he used to not play Magic much between Pro Tours. He was just kind of going to a hyper-focused mode before a tournament and just spending X hours a day before a tournament to prepare, and then he was dropping the game for a month or two before the next tournament game. But I don't think that works quite for me, and I don't think that works for everybody.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying with the challenge results. I was curious to ask you, do you feel like partially it's like you're complacent when you're playing, like you don't really care about the outcome as much? Are you feeling like when you're playing the games, it's a combination of like the deck selection and also just like playing a lot and just getting burnt out from that? What aspect of playing do you think has declined besides you mentioned like playing baseline decks and struggling when you were doing that for different formats and jumping around?
The very common problem I have, especially when I stream and possibly when I don't stream, but I don't notice that as much, so hard to tell. But the problem that I struggle with is that I frequently, on Magic Online, I act first and I think afterwards. And it's like a very common scenario for me to just make a move in a turn and then like be like, oh, obviously that's like terrible because X, Y, Z. And sometimes those moves are even like kind of embarrassingly weak. I can like miss insane things on board, or like just like mistakes that you wouldn't think like can be easily missed, but I sometimes tend to miss those, and I think those have been happening a bit more often in my game lately. And I think if I just play deck a lot and I also try to individually focus during every game, I achieve better results.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's gonna sound silly, but have you tried something like giving yourself some sort of reminder or note, like when you're playing a game that can make you like take your hands off the keyboard before you make decisions in higher impact spots? I would say something that applies directly to Magic Online that I've done is when I recognize, because you I'm sure have this game sense of like when a game is getting to like a tighter spot, like when things are getting like more important, right? I don't know if you know what I'm referring to.
Yeah, it
But
does happen.
when that happens, yeah, do you feel like you have the ability to like take an extra 2 minutes on your Magic Online clock and like just literally like don't make a decision even when it seems obvious? That's sort of something that I've spent more energy recently doing, and it's been beneficial to write a note for myself on my desk or just literally like make myself take 30 seconds before an action if I'm in one of those positions.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly something I should be trying to doing. It's also a bit more difficult when I'm streaming and Gachimuchi is blasting in my headphones and Twitch chat is asking stupid questions or good questions, like interweaving each other. So that's certainly, a pretty unique maybe perspective of someone who always plays on stream. But certainly at the beginning of my streaming, it was 5 years ago at this point, I used to think that it does not affect me much, if at all, but I guess I was also streaming without like music and with a much quieter chat back then, so maybe it didn't affect me that much back then.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, are you streaming? You probably are, right? Like if you're playing like a mock showcase qualifier or something, are you streaming that and feeling
I
like you're getting distracted in those big settings?
I streamed those. The one showcase qualifier that I won, Legacy, I streamed with a 10-minute delay, and I was kind of vocalizing my lines before I clicked them, and I was saying, "Oh, okay, now I will play Reanimate on Grizzlebrand," before I actually clicked it. So
Yeah.
certainly there are solutions to that.
Yeah. I understand that perspective too. Like I can only imagine streaming demands a need for engaging with like your chat and maybe doing so in like a quicker manner and also just like going like having different processes for playing games on stream versus off stream is probably a thing that is hard for me to conceptualize from having never really done that.
Yeah, there is also, but that's kind of like pioneer modern. I feel like if I like focus on those formats, I can often reach a conclusion as to what play is the best or close to the best available from amongst the ones I have. But when I play standard, that's like kind of flips. And in standard, I have constantly been finding myself in mid-range mirrors in situations where I am slightly behind. I have like 3 different free drops available for me to play, and I have zero idea which one is the most winning one. And I can sit in a situation like that for like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and I don't think I will reach a conclusion in there.
Yeah, those situations are tricky. I think even at Worlds there was a lot of situations where similar things happened where players just had no idea. I think even in the situation you just described, like when you're slightly behind and have to make a 3-drop slot, like in this current standard, that decision gets really hard. But yeah, I understand it. It's
Yeah, I had
really
like one
tricky.
specific match versus Paulo Vitor at the New Capena Championship. We were playing an Esper mirror, and I remember sitting there with like exactly 3 different free drops available. We are playing an Esper mirror. I was on the play, and I'm just sitting there, and I just can't for the life of me figure out which one of those is like the best. Like no, can't draw a clue for that from anywhere.
Do you think it's a situation that would have came up in testing or at least occurred like enough times for you to be familiar with, or was it more niche, you think, in the exact texture of the board or what was going on?
Well, it was like early in the game, so it was like turn 4, let's say, and like I was
Yeah.
slightly behind because of something, and the way the Esper deck worked uh, and still works, all your cards are worse from behind, and I think I had a choice between like a defensive Rafine or a defensive wedding announcement, and maybe it was Kaito Shizuki or Skyclave Apparition, and I was just staring at those free cards and just couldn't get anywhere.
Yeah, trying to figure out what your route to victory is when you're slightly behind is really difficult when like all of the cards just seem horrible and like you're like, okay, like my creatures being better statted with wedding announcement is like an intuitive way of winning a lot of these games. But then if the opponent has Rufine in play, it's hard to see any route to victory. And if they're threatening something else going on, like if they have their own 3-drop, then you just feel infinitely behind if you're like the second person to play um, a planeswalker or wedding. So I've been in a lot of those spots in testing, and I think that's
Exactly.
partially why I didn't play Esper even. I felt so uncomfortable in similar positions.
Yeah, that's that's kind of the nature of standard, maybe, but also like certainly some people will perform better in those situations. But well, as you say, you also struggle with that a bit, right? It doesn't come easy.
Yeah, I think part of the issue for me is when I'm playing, I'm always trying to update internally like what my route to victory is, which I'm sure a lot of high level players spend time on too. But for me, like if I can't see any route to victory, I can just spend like 5 minutes like thinking about the same decision. And if I can't think of anything, I'm like, well, what needs to go exactly right? Like how can I demonic tutor my way out of this in the next few turns? And that's where I go from there. From like if everything lines up perfectly, which I'm sure you've been in similar situations, but that's the easiest way for me to conceptualize like how I'm getting back in a game and making a decision a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to think I'm pretty good at actually exactly that. At like thinking what my like next two draw steps need to be to win from a situation that is really bad. That was a really useful skill when I was playing Lantern Control endlessly for
Yeah.
a year or something. I was really a deck that kind of magnified that to an extent. It works a bit differently with cards that like are less absolute than Snaring Bridge, though maybe.
Yeah.
Um.
And it's hard in standard because like I think one example of that, even when I was playing this weekend, I won't spend too much time harping on it, but I played a game in the finals versus Ely where I needed to literally like have his owl hit basically nothing. And in this case, he completely whiffed in like a finals match and
Uh-huh.
lost a game that I thought was completely unwinnable in order to come back. So that was just like an interesting case of like what real routes you have to victory when you're playing like game one of Grixis versus Esper and they have three permanents like a Planeswalker, an Owl, and something else, and you have a Blood Tithe in play or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So it, like
extreme scenarios
identified
like
your
that.
out and played towards it, and it happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're very familiar with that, but I just think it's a lot more pressing to improve that skill because, especially when you're playing um, high level games, like your opponents are just not going to give you a lot of edges, and so some of your edges have to come in like planning for disastrous scenarios for the opponent or avoiding them yourself.
Uh-huh.
I think that's a big skill. Like if you can put yourself in positions where this is kind of abstract, but where you're not losing games very often, that you're slightly ahead at, or you're pressing your advantage most of the time. Um, that's good. And then on the other end of the spectrum, a lot of the time I'll make a lot of plays that give up like a few percentage points in a game to avoid losing to like disastrous scenarios. Like I'll sacrifice some equity on earlier turns, like maybe like 4 through 6 if I'm ahead, in order to play around specific cards. So that's something that I've maybe lost equity from, gained equity from. It's very hard to tell. It's kind of yeah, it just happens in a lot of games where you end up in those situations.
Uh-huh. I also have a question regarding a thing that you have in your MetaFi bio. You say there that a skill that you think is underrated generally and like not utilized often enough is actively trying to infer the cards in your opponent's hand and like at most stages of the game. And I found that pretty interesting because that's not something that I do consciously, not often at least.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make. That's probably the thing that I try to teach my coaching clients the most once they get to like a little bit of a higher level. So you have to give them a base understanding. But broadly, what I do to show that process is just take out like a notepad and try to make decisive points like, okay, our opponent played Forest. They're unlikely to have Layer of the Hydra on turn two, just things that you can infer. And like at a certain point, I think I was showing people when you're playing against mono green, like you should know exactly what cards your opponent can or can't have besides their draw step. Similar thing versus black red midrange and Pioneer were like two good examples of like matchups where you can basically infer like their hand by turn 4 or 5 to a T. And I'd be happy to kind of walk through that process if we played Phoenix or something today, but I think it's kind of one of those skills that just improves from focusing a lot more on what your opponent's doing in turns like 1 through 4 than anything else.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, what the few times I tried to do that, like actively, like consciously think about it, I did actually seemed to very possible to achieve, and I was like, okay, so like there's like 80% chance that the last card in my opponent's hand is not a Dreadbore or something, because I knew that from the earlier turns and like from how they played throughout the game.
Right.
It is like pretty good thing.
That's a great example too that you brought up. Like sometimes playing a matchup and your opponent uses a Dreadbore instead of a Fatal Push, and it's like not easy to necessarily come to the conclusion that they either have second Dreadbore or no other removal, because it's weird to value Dreadbore over Fatal Push in a lot of situations, or vice versa, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think those situations are just constantly coming up, and practicing that skill is probably the most beneficial for modern and standard, or sorry, pioneer and standard play. Like it's a lot harder to do that in modern for sure.
Yeah, certainly. Although like sometimes you can like get a feeling and be okay, it doesn't make sense for them to have a Solitude because it would have been used. So
Yeah, for sure. And against Murktide, also like another matchup where you can infer a lot of information, but the things change enough where it's hard to use that information as well as you can in matchups where people look at so many less cards. So they're probably the situations where you gain the most from it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I also have a comment on something that happens to my game. I think I'm not sure about this, but I think I might be a bit weaker than, like, relatively weak in playing against blue decks, because I tend to play quite scared versus counter spells, I guess, which kind of ties into the like not actively inferring what is in your opponent's hands. But oftentimes when I play some matchups that involve a counter spell, I play them from both sides, and I kind of feel worse than it seems they are for my opponents from the other side. You get what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
when I'm playing, let's say when I was playing Murktide versus Yorion, or Yorion versus Murktide, I think this was kind of a matchup that I was managing to maybe not lose from both sides, but like have like a relatively lower win percentage from both sides, because of the counter spell and like how punishing like it could have been, or not, when it wasn't there. Which was something I was thinking about a little bit. At times I have not reached any conclusions as to how to like work on that, but I guess like actively trying to work out my opponent's hand would be a way to fight that. I think I definitely throughout my career left some games on the table by playing either too scared or like too hastily into counter spells. Kind of like always feels like I'm playing the wrong way into them.
yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I don't really want to give any general heuristics on how to play into counterspells because you're probably familiar with like what you should be doing in theory, and like the execution and like the hard spots is like kind of difficult. But one dynamic that is always hard for me as well is trying to figure out if it would make sense for an opponent to use a counter spell or like a removal spell in certain situations, and why they would do that. For example, like if you had two removal spells, would you always just use a removal spell? Or if you had two counter spells, would you always use a counter spell versus your one removal spell? And trying to infer information from that has been helpful. And then also just being very like finding the spots to resolve a card like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, which are like kind of resilient to removal but bad against counterspell, is like kind of a trickier dynamic. Just or like Ren and Six, whatever card that gets value as soon as you get it resolved is like really tricky to play into those dynamics as well. So
Yeah,
I see how that's like a
a spot I
difficult
find
thing.
tricky, specifically in Pioneer right now, is Pieces of the Puzzle versus Absorb, and it's oftentimes that I have the pieces and I have free mana, but my opponent also has free mana, and we kind of just sit there, and I'm like, should I cast it? And I have real trouble arriving at a conclusion as to whether I should or not, oftentimes.
Yeah, I usually have a good heuristic versus blue-white control in Pioneer where I'm willing to jam my cards into counterspell starting on turn 4, so as soon as they get Wandering Emperor slash
Deluge.
Memory Deluge mana. Um, and I usually won't play any cards into just 3 mana from the control side because they have no punishes. So it's a lot easier to play into that dynamic. What I find trickier is when your opponents can actually do threatening things with that mana otherwise. And once you get into that spot, you mostly have to play your cards. But if there's nothing threatening, I'm really willing to just sit there if I think my configuration can play towards a longer game. Or
That's a good heuristic,
yeah,
obviously.
yeah, that's a hopeful one. Another one is like if I have Galvanic Iteration in hand, I'm mostly just trying to combine that with pieces of the puzzle when I'm playing versus blue eye control. So sometimes I'll just think of it as like the time walk combo, just like Galvanic plus pieces can do a similar impression
Mm-hmm.
and force them to have at least one counter. Hard dynamics for sure. But I think playing against this traditional blue eye control is like a good test case of how to play um, that sort of matchup that I found helpful with Phoenix specifically. So that's a good example.
All right, so I wanted to also touch yet again on your preparation for tournaments. So, if I understood correctly, you would you say that you mostly choose a deck for a tournament based on theory, and then you like kind of get your reps in before, so that you are familiar with the cards exactly? Is that like a good
Yeah.
picture that I'm painting?
Well, yeah, I would also add that I probably am a lot happier than the average person watching games of Magic and trying to infer information. Like I'm a pretty active watcher, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty likely to want to watch both sides of a matchup and jump around and take notes and like use that as opposed to if I need to get hands-on experience playing a tricky matchup, then I will do that, but the expectation of like this is going to be a more productive way of collectively figuring out what's important. So yeah, I would say the theory comes helpful when I need to figure out what decks I want to play, and then sometimes my theory is wrong, and you have to go back and be like, what did I do wrong after playing some games? But maybe I'm more willing to make assumptions based on a smaller set of games because I trust my theoretical understanding a little better.
Mm-hmm. A good point about the like active watching of the games. I kind of find that hard to do myself. Uh, just I don't know, maybe some like attention span problems, but I rarely very actively watch games of Magic. It's kind of find that's hard
Yeah,
to focus on.
yeah. I think it's tricky because a lot of magic content, especially when I'm watching like streams or just content made for like people to learn like a baseline understanding, isn't made for like top levels of engaging. And so my processes for like learning from watching matches have been like kind of difficult um to figure out until probably more recently. Like there are certain people who are just really good at um, taking away information based on a smaller sample and like replicating it and being like, okay, like this is something that's probably going to hold true like the next 4 or 5 times, or at least like that's something that they infer, and that's a skill that I think has taken me far. Like working on that has not been trivial for sure.
I have a few interesting questions in the chat. First, Banjo Caveman says that for them, it's tough to watch actively if the player that they're watching diverges far enough from the plays that they would have made, just so they kind of don't stay as invested anymore. Which
Interesting.
which is interesting. Although this is also something you could take as a learning like opportunity. If you see someone making plays that are different than yours, then well, chances are that either theirs or yours are like more correct. So
Right.
probably worth to
Well,
think about.
figuring out why someone is thinking something different from you is like just a really important thing that helps you learn, right? Like if all the people who I tested with would think the same thing about how to play a game, I feel like it would be a lot harder for me to see a lot of games play out and improve upon like how something went wrong. So usually when I see a game happen that I'm like, this thing happened that I would never consider doing, it's probably right that one of us is closer to the truth, right? So you have to figure out why that's
Mm-hmm.
the case or who it is without being biased by by your own thoughts and your own ideas, maybe holding more weight in your mind.
Another question we've got in the chat: how often do you rewatch your own games? If you play games, how do you like? How often do you come back to them? Is that something that you do?
Yeah, I like watching VODs and VOD replays. I usually do that after like really tough losses or nail biter wins. I don't really have any standouts when like that those situations don't occur to go back to, but it's really helpful for me to do a turn by turn of like, okay, I remember what happened in this game. What was my opponent thinking on this turn, given that I can kind of infer what cards they have, and what was I thinking? And then writing down like at that point in the game like what cards I think they have in hand is helpful even in a replay because I know like sort of what's gonna how it's gonna play out and figuring out what their hand looks like based on that helps me improve that skill as well.
So you try to like infer what you and your opponent were thinking at a certain point, like where, for
Right.
example,
I
a
would
key
say
decision happened.
right. A key decision happened or even just like early sequencing in a game is like an easy way of doing that. And looking back on the games like um there's just a lot that you miss. Like even like me or like a lot of other pro players just will miss a lot in like an average game of Magic. So going back and like
True.
pretending that you're replaying a game is super helpful for that. That's kind of part of the theory thing as opposed to playing games. Like I'd say watching and replaying a game is oftentimes more helpful than playing the same set again.
Yeah, I've occasionally do that. Thankfully, for the Magic Online function of replaying your games, you can just kind of quickly go to the situation, to the part of the game that you want to take an extra look at. And I do that especially when I like hyper focus on a single deck. So when I was playing Phoenix lately, I've been doing that sometimes when I never do that when I win. Well, but when I
Yeah.
when I lose, I like go back and be like, okay, here my decision maybe was not ideal, but I never like put this in the really in the frame that you are describing of like trying to think what my opponent was thinking at the time. That's like a pretty, I guess that's pretty useful, pretty good thing to think about.
Yeah. Another concept that this circles back to is like a critical turn in the game because often you run into situations where you have like one or two decision points that look like this is like the tipping point and where things kind of diverged in one direction or the other, right? And I think watching the games gives you a better sense of if that decision actually happened like a turn or two earlier and you didn't realize how that those decisions cascaded. So that's something that I've noticed as a pattern after watching games more.
Hmm.
Do you get that sense when playing where you're in a game and you're like, okay, this is going to be like one of the most important decisions in a game, like as soon as you run
He's a
into a spot or
phenomenal
like a turn before
control
or whatever?
player.
Well, I'm trying to think about it because yeah, you said that before. I know that, but actually, I'm not super sure that it happens to me like that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. It's hard for me to say. Like you,
Do you know what I'm describing though when I mention that sort of thing occurring? Like, do you feel like everything is more fluid than that when you're playing, or is there like extreme tipping points that happen?
I, it's pretty hard for me to say, but I would say that like it feels more fluid for me in general. But
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I tilt a little bit and like I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, this was pretty crucial because I drew like land and then spell pierce and not spell pierce and then land. and that was like game deciding. But I don't think that's what you're talking about, right?
Well, I mean, that still hints at the same concept of like there are going to be things sometimes in your control and out of your control that are like the key thing from either side that happens. Um, like, okay, a lot of the time when you're playing, for me at least, I end up in situations where like this play, if left punished by like the opponent's next best play, is going to be game winning. How often is this play gonna sneak through, right? Like how often is my opponent not gonna have a wandering emperor and take 4 off Shieldred if I think the game is about my opponent's life total racing Shieldred versus having more time with Shieldred in play. Just as an
Mm,
example.
okay, I see. I think I see.
So that would be like maybe a critical play in a game where like if this thing goes right or wrong for a reason that you've laid out, it may decide the game. And you also could be wrong. That could not be like the most important thing in a game. But in my head, I'm trying to conceptualize like if I play Corpse Appraiser versus Fable on turn 3, after I killed my opponent's Denic in a game, and I had to make that decision. And I've done it plenty in testing where the answer is you're just supposed to play Fable. But for a second, some part of me was like, well, if I get punished by a second Denic brickwalling my Fable token, then I can't use Corpse Appraiser, and my Fable token won't get through unless I hit a removal spell, um, and I might lose. And so, uh,
I was
like
curious
running
about
into
that play
these
that time
scenarios.
actually.
So that was a mistake for sure. That was a mistake, and some part of my brain was like, I can't kill a follow up Danik, but that was my justification in my head for some reason. I thought that um, that was going to be a disastrous scenario, and I was trying to avoid it, even though that wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm. So you said you make a mistake here. Was was it kind of a mistake out of fear? Let's say, like kind of playing scared. That's what you would say about this.
I would say, yeah, maybe out of fear, maybe also just like a misevaluation of what I have going for me, because I think at the time I didn't process that I had an Infernal Grasp, and I was like, thinking that, yeah, this card really punishes me. And if I didn't have Infernal Grasp, I think that decision is really close.
Uh-huh.
Because the punish is so bad. On the other hand, you can make the argument that the punish isn't so bad because you just get to flip your Fable faster, and the Esper deck has to be responsive. So I think, yeah, that's the situation of like playing out of fear, maybe like the stress of playing in top 4 of Worlds, like playing the third game, what made me want to make more conservative decisions, even though it ended up not being the case that that was a more conservative route, I think.
So really interesting. Like you give a really valuable perspective to like the game of Magic, and it's really interesting for me to hear you. I bet Chad also enjoys that.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like that's another concept that I don't know how many people focus a lot of energy on, but I'm constantly like worrying about like even when a game is almost over, like what is the worst play for me on the next turn, and I just always assume like my opponent's gonna have access to that, and moving from there and like trying to figure out ways of beating that has worked for me. On the other hand, like you kind of talked about with like fear of playing into counterspell, that sometimes leads into scenarios where I play around too much. So trying to find that balance around playing around the perfect amount is like the goal, and certainly not trivial.
Have you ever played Hearthstone?
A bit. I wouldn't say I spent more than like 5 hours playing Hearthstone though, so I'm kind of a noob.
Yeah, I played like a little bit, like mostly like, just on the ladder casually. But when I started playing Hearthstone, I was, I guess, like also still relatively new to Magic, and I don't think I even was thinking about like playing competitively back then in general too much. It was just a game I was playing Magic and Hearthstone. But one thing I used not to do in Magic was like I was not doing the thing you described, like thinking of like my opponent's like strongest punish and like how likely it is. I wasn't thinking about this too much. I was just like kind of playing my cards, and playing Hearthstone kind of teach me that that is a thing, because it feels much more, or at least it felt back then. It was like early Hearthstone. It felt much more pronounced in that game, because the decks were party cards only, and you don't have lands, and you just draw the spells every time. That just meant that I think the likelihood of your opponent having the like most powerful play on curve every time was greater than it is in Magic. So I think that game really taught me that a little bit, because like you kind of always had to assume that that druid is going to swipe on 4. So like you couldn't leave like a 4 toughness creature and 3 1 toughness creatures coming into that turn. You just like couldn't. While in Magic it like frequently felt to me like, oh yeah, maybe they won't have it. Like, what are the odds that they're gonna draw like one of their 4 Wrath of Gods right now? And like sometimes they don't. Like they will not draw the Wrath of God with a greater. They will draw the Wrath of God less often in Magic than they will draw the swipe in Hearthstone.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense just for how to like conceptualize how it applies to like kind of adjacent situations in Magic. It's a little bit harder because you also have to be like, how bad is it for me if this punish happens? Do I have the next best recourse versus it? Because sometimes you're like, I'd rather get this out of the way because it's always going to be bad for me. And those are like kind of hard scenarios, right? Like it's always going to be bad, except I have like an okay follow up, and the later it gets worse. Versus if I make them do it later, it will probably get better for me because I'll have more recourse on the same turn. Um, like this also affected me like at Worlds, honestly, when it's like this dynamic of Shieldred makes it like really hard for me to configure my decks because I have this tendency to want to build my deck to have like maybe 1 more or 2 more answers than average, because I don't want to like auto lose to this card if it just sits in play for 2 or 3 turns. And yeah, it's harder because maybe different players are more like, if they have it, they have it, and my mentality is closer to like, well, if they have it, I want to try to make the game as close as possible, even if it means like configuring my deck slightly differently to accommodate that.
Mm-hmm. I'm not a big fan of chess, or like I don't know like super much about chess in general. I don't know if you do, but like a tangent that I remembered was that I listened to a podcast with Magnus Carlsen lately, and he was kind of like speaking about something similar, that he knows that he's great at short-term calculation in like end games, and he also like tries to extend, like give himself all the chance to extend the game as much as he can to get to those end games, because he's gonna perform better in those. It doesn't translate 1-to-1 to Magic, but it's kind of.
I think that's pretty similar, like the overlap between wanting to have your game split like that and not. And also at the same time, it's kind of natural not to want to act that way if you rationally are like, I don't have the strongest technical player like fundamentals, and therefore this might not be advantageous for me if you're like a certain type of player, or like you have less experience with a deck or a matchup. And I think I would have played very differently if I had like chosen to play Esper versus all the Esper Maris, for example, because I would have felt like my ability to navigate these late game scenarios was maybe worse or like on par with most of my opponents, and so trying to avoid those situations is a bigger benefit to me than the alternative of like needing to play in a direction that I'm unfamiliar with.
All right, we've got a few more questions in the chat. The first one from Tricolas. What drew you to Phoenix for the mocks that you won? You won those, right? Yeah, you did. Was it a dip in the
Yeah,
cyber graveyard hate? Yeah, that was actually kind of interesting to watch because Phoenix like all but disappeared from Magic Online, and like everyone just kind of thought it's like not a good deck anymore for some reason. So it kind of like made the deck rise from ashes with that finish, let's say.
yeah. So the first thinking was that was where the metagaming was super helpful. I would say in an 8-player field, um, I already knew that 2 or 3 people were going to bring mono green,
Mm-hmm.
and I broadly felt like the misconception about Phoenix was based around like a misunderstanding of how to navigate it versus green to make that matchup a lot like better. I think you just have to have like a very concrete plan to be pretty favorable versus green, like maybe 5% because the deck is so strong and it's hard to have better than that versus green. Um, and then the other thing was, yeah, red black had started cutting their go blanks, and we expected that since I was testing with Marcio Carvalho for the tournament, we expected that people would peg us on black red or something similar, and it would be um, probably not that great of an idea for them to want to play black red mid range mirrors versus if they made that assumption. I think maybe
Mm.
that's a little bit like a weird thing to say, but I felt like at the time it would be a bad decision to want to play those mid-range mirrors into probably stronger like technical players if that's how they felt the matchup was.
Yeah, that
Um,
makes sense. Also, like if you say there is 2 to 3 mono green players in the field already, the like common view is that Rakdos is behind that deck, so that would also probably scare away most players if they also would believe that there is going to be those 2 or 3 mono green
right,
players.
right. So I was looking for edges. Like, basically, I knew I didn't really want to play green because I think the green deck in a vacuum is the best deck by a pretty wide margin, but the deck has issues with um, like finding edges in gameplay, and that's something that I'm always looking for when I'm playing like
It
a
does.
deck into an expected field. I just think you play your cards a lot of the time, and like if you don't mess up your sequencing, you gain like maybe 2 to 3% in a given match. And so yeah, I knew I didn't really want to play green, and I was thinking there won't be as many red black opponents. I knew there was going to be at least one humans opponent, and then I thought that Claudio was likely going to bring Niv or something similar in that sort of shell, and I just could not imagine a situation in which that deck could configure itself well against Phoenix,
Mhm.
unless he had like a hard read. So those are the factors that led me to play Phoenix. I would say Phoenix kind of was similar to wanting to play Spirits into the event, except it had a little bit of a broader, um, like maybe better matchup spread against the random decks and like humans and Niv. So that was like the ultimate tiebreaker if we wanted to beat Mono Green and also be good against a few other decks.
Yeah, so like you basically made a call in like shorter terms to say didn't expect red black, expected mono green, and you configured the deck to fight against green. You had many strokes and gusts in the sideboard for that
Yeah, I
reason.
mean it's really hard. Yeah, it's really hard to select a deck in Pioneer for like uh, a smaller field if you don't have insight into like what the top few decks are. Like if I had no deck preferences or like I didn't know anyone else in the field had them, I think it would be pretty hard not to play green basically. Like if you thought everyone was neutral going into it. But biases played a big part.
Interesting. You said biases?
Yeah, like player tendencies.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. No, yeah. So you meant the biases of other players choosing their decks,
Yeah, and also
or do you
partially
mean
my own
your own
bias.
bias towards playing an interactive deck that lets you like gain the edges rather than playing mono green and playing your monster on every turn?
Probably both. Yeah, probably a combination. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an unbiased party when I'm selecting my deck. Like I have preferences, and usually, those preferences are hopefully based on like things that I perceive as stronger. Sometimes that's not the case. Like, I just felt like maybe everyone thought Phoenix was a bad deck because of a misconception around how bad it was versus Red Black. Like I didn't think the matchup was good, but I thought it was closer to like 40, 47 or 46%, like a little bit better
Mhm.
than 45, 55. Yeah, using those numbers is also helpful for me to conceptualize. And I don't know, I mean, things change. Like my opponents at one of the tournaments had two main deck hearses um, at like an earlier mocks, like a month or two before that, and two go blank sideboard. And then suddenly hearses went to the sideboard and go blanks got cut. So that perception is very helpful for Phoenix, right?
Yeah, certainly that changes a lot. There was also the mocks in which I played, and you and Tangrams chose to play Grixis Death Shadow with Lurus. You certainly had a pretty. Like, I assume you were pretty convinced that I'm going to play Yorion in that tournament. I assume it was not like too hard of a
Yeah.
read to make.
I think that was a situation where we were like 90% sure that was going to be the case. And were you the only four color player? Remind me.
Yes, it was me. It was Zerg with Blue Eyed Hammer. It was both of you with Grixis. It was Beekeeper with Timur
Rhinos.
Rhinos with
Yeah.
Archmage's Charm. And
There was the Yawgmoth player, right? Was it? No, there wasn't Yawgmoth, I
well,
guess.
Zerg
What
is
else?
the Yawgmoth player. He plays lots of Yawgmoth, but he played Hammer at that
That's right.
tournament. Yeah, also was
And then
there was also
Tommy,
Bob with Belcher and Tommy too.
Belcher Bob, and Tommy
What
on
did Tommy
the
play?
Red White Prowess. He played Red White Prowess, which
Oh
was an
yeah, yeah.
interesting choice.
I didn't quite understand that. And there was also the mill player.
Yes. Was that Binu?
Yes. No. Yes, that was Binu. Because it was Binu and Beekeeper, so like kinda confusing.
Yeah. That was a weird metagame, really weird. I think you kind of got unlucky that I think David, like Tangrams and I, both thought that four color would be a little more represented than average because we knew you were going to play it. We thought at least one other person would play it, like maybe
Mm-hmm.
Tommy. And so we were like, we'll play main deck Torox
Yeah,
and
my
try to whoop
Torak.
our list as much as possible. I was like, well, this seems like the best card post board against four color. Why don't we just add it to the main deck in our two flex slots and hopefully that does work.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, we all knew that Bob is going to be there, and like
Yeah.
there was also a 90% chance that he's gonna play Belcher, and like who in the right mind is going to play four color into 12.5% metagame of Belcher, right?
It's hard. I don't think we thought the matchup was so bad. Remind me, did you play Ragavans in that tournament or no?
Excuse me.
Did you play Ragavans in your four color deck?
I think I did. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, I did. I did.
I think we tested a lot with four color and we thought like the Belcher matchup was like not that bad. Like maybe like I don't know. You can make it like 40, 43, 44. I don't know, like a little less than what I would hope for, but I didn't think it was that bad overall when we played it. They just had like a lot of weaknesses, and I think we did a few things differently to accommodate. But yeah, that deck is sketchy to play four color into in general.
Well, I mean, I did also kind of thought that at some point, and I streamed with Sodek, who's also like plays Belcher a lot. We played Folklore versus Belcher, and I kind of like had close games, but lost, I don't know, 4 out of 5 matches. And after the matches, I was talking with Sodek on Discord a little bit, and I was saying, oh yeah, maybe it's like not too bad, right? I almost win so many games. It's kind of close. And he's like, no, bro, it wasn't close. No, it wasn't close at any point. It got close from your side, but like I was never scared of you, which
Yeah,
still wasn't enough to put me off for color. I did have a brief moment of thinking that I want to play Merktide, Blue-Red Merktide in that tournament, but ultimately, like I'm really scared of not having enough reps with a deck before playing in a tournament. So I just played so much less games with that deck compared to Focolor that I just took the comfy option, and I think it was a medium to poor choice for me back then, but it was just comfortable, so I went with the comfortable one.
I think going into that sort of tournament again, just not knowing the metagame, you would make the same choice on the rationale of just it being a more of a comfort pick, or you think now if you were testing, you would try to dismiss that feeling and like test something else? Is that something that's shifted for you, or you think pretty reliably you try to aim to be comfortable with your deck and use that as a tiebreaker?
I pretty reliably try to do that. I
Yeah.
like right now I again have the upcoming tournament in Sofia. I would want to not say that I locked myself into playing Phoenix a month ago, but I kind of did. But also
Hmm.
vibe well with this deck, and like I liked the places that my list is going so far, and I also think it's going to be a better list if I keep playing it. Like it does
Yeah.
seem like one of your strengths is like just being able to adapt quickly
Hmm.
towards playing like different decks, because when I try to do that, I just always see when I try to change decks too much, I see the punishment pretty quickly. Like I just play worse. My lists are worse. My plans are less ironed out. I maybe it's a mental thing, but I think it is a real thing. I think I just need the preparation, the like familiarity with a deck.
Yeah, no, I think that's like a common thing. I don't think that's completely what's the word? Uncommon. It's just my brain works like a little weirdly in the sense that I feel like playing different archetypes is sometimes comforting for me to try to learn and adapt to, but also my learning, like the time that I need to learn might be a little lower, and that's like a benefit that I've gained. And then a lot of positions are like uh, yeah, I don't have time, and my plans are bad when I'm playing like weekend events, and that can be tough as well. Like Magic Online really rewards you choosing. For me, I would just choose what I thought the best deck was, regardless of how confident I was in my play skill. And then if I lost because I played poorly, I would be like, well, what did I do wrong? Like, why did I make this mistake? Was it unfamiliarity or something else? And that's like the normal process that I try to go through. But I understand like the idea of just wanting to play something that is more comforting because yeah, you know what you're doing.
Also, chat brings a good point. Terry Bud MTG says that it sounds like a team thing. Also, if you know the list is good because other people already made it great, it's easier to switch, um, which is, I guess, true. And I think sometimes when I played in teams, I prepared for tournaments in teams. Maybe I didn't have the level of trust into the deck list like developed by somebody else oftentimes, and that's also makes me reluctant to swap to it. So I guess that might also play
Yeah,
play a big role. Like having actual like trust into your teammates seems pretty important.
yeah, that can be hard for me too sometimes, where it's like specific slots look off, but and you're not convinced by someone's justification for why it's right. And also, I sometimes am like, you're in that scenario where you don't have time to actually play the games yourself and prove their theories, so you just have to hope that they're right. And it's not the most comforting situation for me as well. But ultimately, when I've worked with like similar teammates for the past year ish, it's become a lot easier. At the beginning of the process, I still think it was rocky. Like, yeah, just tough.
So did you often end up playing like did you ever like end up playing a deck that you like haven't worked on for a tournament, that you haven't like been amongst the people trying to prepare the deck beforehand?
Yeah, so I played mono green over blue red Epiphany at the first PT at the end of last year,
Mhm.
and I'd spent a lot of testing playing Epiphany, but I still wasn't like super comfortable with that deck or the mono green
He's a
deck. And
phenomenal
then my
control
teammate
player.
Simon Nielsen, who's just infamously really good at making these aggro decks and fine tuning the slots, had a mono green deck that I thought was really good. And I played some sets and felt pretty comfortable playing against blue red in terms of like um, the the results and the play pattern seemed good. But going into the tournament, I was just hadn't played many games at all. I didn't really understand this, and like it was kind of a wake up call that like playing these aggro decks or creature decks actually took a lot more prep for me to be good with than other strategies because I'm just not familiar with it as much. And I think my play suffered a decent amount as a result of that. That was the first time that it happened in like more recent times.
Mm.
Um, let me see. Is there another example? Oh yeah, I played mono white humans at the second pro tour, which was alchemy, and similar philosophy happened where last few days we found that we had a deck that we thought beat runes. That was the event where I think everyone was aiming for trying to beat runes or play runes, and we found that deck last minute and then decided to play it. But similar thing happened where it just doesn't really play to my strengths as well as a player, and I didn't practice as much. So it kind of reminded me like maybe my principle uh, of adopting what I think is the best strategy despite less experience is helpful, but there are still certain weaknesses that I need to account for when it comes to like deck selection. And I know in the future if I play a creature centric deck like that, like a tribal creature deck, I need to spend a lot more time because it's just not intuitive for me, and I make mistakes that I wouldn't make with a slower deck like four color Yorion even.
Yeah, but you mean that you need to spend time on improving your gameplay moves rather than on tuning the list, or is it a mix of both?
Yeah, most of the time those are situations where I've had trusted teammates to have good lists, and just maybe afterward like okay, like a few things were wrong, but generally like the concept of the slots makes sense to me, and I'll work with it. But yeah, that's kind of going back to like I need to be comfortable with the gameplay rather than the slots thing. And if I didn't have a team, I just would stick to more comfort pick. So that's the advantage of having a team most of the time.
Mm-hmm. All right. It's been super useful, Nathan, and thank you for
Yeah.
having the talk with me. What do you think about playing a few matches with Phoenix right now with your input?
Yeah, let's do it. That sounds good.